This is NEGOTIATEx TV.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on the NEGOTIATEx Podcast. We are continuing our conversations with Professors Beth Bellman and Lon Moeller from the Tippy College of Business. If you haven't already checked out part A of this show, be sure to do that first. Let's jump into the conversation with Beth and Lon. Y'all both referenced a number of skills negotiators need to practice and master to become more effective. Which ones do you personally feel are most important in today's world? I'll kick it over to you, Lon.
That's a good question, Nolan. I think there's two fundamentally. One is rapport building, building that meaningful relationship with the other negotiator. And the other is the ability to identify interest. And so in terms of rapport building, oftentimes our students think that's something I call schmoozing. They think if they're in the same major course of study as a classmate, they have rapport. If they're from the same suburb of the city of Chicago, where a lot of our students come from, that's rapport building. But again, rapport building is more about, is this somebody I can trust? This is somebody I can share information with. And how do I go about building that trusting relationship? And a lot of that comes down to both asking questions, being curious, and then, as Beth mentioned, being an active listener. And in terms of interest, we try to talk about interest being a broad spectrum of different ideas. It may be tangible interests such as money, a particular outcome, but then there's a lot of kind of that psychological aspect Beth was talking about that's important to us as negotiators. I want to be respected when I negotiate. I talked about the first example, kind of a failed negotiation for me, but one of my interests is making sure that my client and my boss appreciated the work I did. So how does one go about doing that? A lot of it's just that introspection as you're practicing and preparing to identify what it is you're looking for and look at that in a really broad fashion. So again, to me, building rapport, learning how to establish that relationship, then understanding the question to ask yourself and the other party about identifying the interests that are going to allow you to find the common ground you need to reach an agreement.
Beth, before you respond to this question, can we drill a little deeper? And you're welcome to respond here too. On rapport building, Lon, I'm curious, just given some of the work you've done where I would anticipate the relationships are incredibly strained, in those instances where you're going and there's either been prior damage, even if I wasn't the one who created it, but my predecessor did, are there things I can do to improve rapport, demonstrate respect when I'm walking into a situation where relationship is damaged?
That's a great question. And I think part of it is to be prepared. And again, that's knowing more than just what you want. And that's when you sit back and say, why is the other side upset with me? And a lot of times the negotiations I had, to your point, was, I'd come in as that third party. And so I had no relationship at all with the parties themselves. But so I had to really understand what the relationship was. I had to let them know that I'm somebody they could work with. So being prepared, understanding what the issues are critical. But oftentimes you need to acknowledge what's happened in the past. And that's why the use of things like apologies or just recognition that, things went off the track and we're here to get things back on the track. Focus on what's going on in the future. You don't want to necessarily you don't want to forget the past, but you don't want to relitigate it. So to answer your question, I think part of it is being prepared to understand what the issues are, demonstrating that competency, but also acknowledge the fact that you have to take that dispute on head on. Acknowledge it in the meeting you have and say, yeah, I messed up, or things didn't go well, and I understand why that is, and I apologize for it.
Beth, anything you'd add there on the relationship piece?
Yeah, I'll start with the relationship piece and then move on to those other skills, and you'll hear a theme here. Rapport definitely makes my top 5 list of something I would hope my undergraduate students come away with understanding the importance of. And I'll even tell them, even in negotiations with somebody that well, I encourage them to still build rapport. It will look different from getting to know that person, even if it's as simple as, how's your day been? What's something you're looking forward to? Just to emphasize the human connection there. And I think to this point about relationships, if the relationship is important enough to attempt to repair, in those contexts, I really see negotiations as an opportunity to voice that, this is an important relationship to me, and I'm sorry that we're having this difference. Like Lon said, the use of apologies, and then the opportunity to attempt to repair that and move forward. Again, whether you agree or you're going to agree to disagree, but it can be done respectfully and, in a positive way.
I love that response, and I don't want to interrupt your thought, but give you a chance to breathe before we get into other skills. And I just what you said, right? The negotiation can be an opportunity to just voice this need that we need to do something around relationship. What a great response. And then prior to that, when you were saying, even with people we know well, I find that some of my students talk about the more difficult negotiations are with the people they have very tight relationships with. That it's almost like the relationship becomes held hostage or something like that. Thoughts on that?
Absolutely, right? Those are those instances where we might be compelled to be more accommodating and give up more of what's important to us because we value the relationship. And sometimes I think that's completely appropriate if you have the clarity on what the priorities are, right? Yeah.
Other skills, other things that most important. Yeah. Especially given today's world, we're sitting here in 2024, the context, the world around us. Yeah. Any thoughts there?
I'm going to go back to understanding your own interests. Now we've touched on tangible and intangible interests. I agree 100% with Lon. It's oftentimes those intangibles. What else is important? Recognition, acknowledgement, right? But in the general impression, the general public's impression of negotiations, everybody goes to price. Right? That's right. The most common place that we go. So understanding your interests, being able to articulate those, being willing to, practicing that communication, and then being curious, taking the time to ask about, trying to uncover the other party's interests. And they may or may not have done the work to identify those, but you might be able to help draw those out in real time. This is, of course, linked to active listening. And even if no agreement's reached, I think that having clarity about what's important to you and what's important to people that you're in relationship with, colleagues, coworkers, friends, family, whoever it is also important. So active listening, I guess, great life skill. We talked earlier, people like to be heard. And so I think that goes a long way. And looking for shared underlying interests, not assuming fixed pie or it's an automatic conflict, but where are we in alignment and sort of going the same direction, even if there are a couple of things that we have some differing thoughts on.
I want to ask a little bit more on this interest thing, and some of it gets to the quality of questions we ask and a desire to be genuinely curious. I occasionally will get a student, and I'm curious if you've ever had this happen. Students who say, I just don't know what to ask. I don't know the question. And then they start feeling like, I just guess maybe I'm not a very curious person. How do you help students? Because to listen, I've got to maybe have asked something. To get to interest, I've probably got to ask, how do you coach students through something like that?
Yeah, I've got an open mic, so I'll just jump right in here.
Go for it.
Several things, strategies for that. So one is follow the thread, right? There's always tell me a little more about that, right? If you can't come up with a specific follow-up question, or tell me why that is the most important issue to you, or how that's going to improve your outcomes. So following the thread, some other strategies I'll suggest is maybe for each student, I'm going to ask 2 more questions, like quantify the number of questions more. Like we talked about earlier, negotiation 1 to the end of the 17-week semester, many of them are asking more questions. So they could come up with a number or a count. It could be a context-specific question, but just being curious. And I do think they learn over time, like Lon said. I mean, that's part of the evolution in their skill set.
Lon, anything you'd add to that? I love that response.
No, just a couple of things. That was a good response that Beth gave. I think one thing I'd ask students of, what's an ideal outcome look like to you? So kind of paint that picture. And then ask the student, if you were on the other side, again, role reversal is always hard for students in general to get themselves in somebody else's shoes, but why would they say yes to your proposals? What about your proposal is compelling? And then in this day and age, whether it's LinkedIn or other resources, we'll find information about people. And there's always something about somebody's background that is curious. And I might ask a student, well, ask about that. I mean, for example, your military experience there. That might be some point of conversation. And then you can kind of create some questions off of that. And then that allows that rapport building we talked about. But I think two things. One is identifying the ideal outcome, and then, what's in it for them. Think about, if you're on their side, why would you say yes or no to what you're asking for?
And I'm going to go back, Beth, something you said, to do what Lon just said. I think I have to have that mindset, which is, this doesn't necessarily need to be zero sum, and I may not know everything I need to be able to solve this in the best or most effective way. And so a lot of it goes back to kind of our framing and our own mindset we enter the negotiation with.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming in with an open mind or even an optimistic mind versus that. A lot of the reasons students report they're not excited about negotiation early in the class is they think it's going to be conflict laden, and they shy away from that kind of conflict because it's potentially uncomfortable. So shifting, I think, the mindset about what's the opportunity here, and isn't it exciting that we have this opportunity?
Right.
Yeah.
You discussed many different challenges faced by negotiators. We've heard power dynamics, ethical issues, perceptions, gender and culture differences, emotions, so on. Which of these do you believe are the most difficult to manage, and what is your advice for someone caught in navigating those situations? I'll kick it over to you, Beth.
Yeah, I'm going to go with power differences on this one. There are some situations where there's just going to be no way around that there exists some kind of structural, whether that's legitimate, reward power, difference. Maybe you're negotiating with your boss or a parent. And so there's always going to be some situations where this power difference exists. And this is the area I think I see undergraduates struggle with the most. My advice is to remember that when you're negotiating, by definition, you have something the other negotiator wants or needs. And so you're not powerless. So to try to remember that and identify the source of power that they bring to the table. And I'm going to go back to then identifying your underlying interests and being willing to communicate those and uncover those of the other negotiator. So even if that outcome is not what you wanted, the upside of this is that you will have clearly shared what's important to you, which I believe is valuable in deepening relationships. So rather than just accepting, okay, there's a power differential, I'll just do whatever they ask, if they're in the position of power, and you're not expressing what's important to you and showing up authentically, it might result in some disappointment with the outcome or with yourself for not, saying what was true for you and trying to learn more and further that relationship.
You framed that by talking about when it's a structural thing. When it becomes a manipulative thing and somebody is using the power difference, the other person that I'm negotiating with is using the power difference as a difficult tactic, and they're using it to to exploit the relationship or the differences in power. Does your advice change at all in terms of how you would coach a negotiator, kind of manage that more tactical kind of level of abuse of power?
Yeah, that's a great point. And we talk a little bit about in the book, identifying what is difficult in this situation. Are they being strategically difficult is one of the things that we address there. And I think that's important to identify. And then it's just going to be, is this the kind of person you want to stay in relationship with? Now, you might not be able to leave your job or whatever the cost or risk might be too high. But at least if you identify it's a strategy and you can separate the problem from the person, that might open up a little more. But being able to identify the source of that, and then asking yourself, we teach you shouldn't make every deal. Of course, we want people making great deals and more deals, and knowing when I need to say no.
That's almost as powerful as knowing when to say yes, as knowing when to walk away.
Yes. And I teach no just means next. Come on. Don't let it derail you so much. Just keep going.
Wow. I can appreciate that. I'm in the midst of grading assignments right now. And I would say that's one of the things that students are learning comfort with is just being able to say no. And then it's not a reflection on you. It's not a reflection on me. This just was not a deal to be made today.
Absolutely. So, and saying sometimes when I say no to a request, for something, you can even give context to it and say, the no is not about you. It's a yes for myself and my other priorities. Right? That's right. Is another way.
That's nicely said.
How about you, Lon?
I just want to follow up on a point that Beth made about all of our students, when they come to class, think in negotiations, I think Aram talked about a zero-sum game. But, in business, there's very few completely or exclusively transactional-based negotiations. For example, I bought a car from a car dealership in town for 15 years, where I bought cars over the years. Those, on their surface, look to be kind of win-lose distributive negotiations. But I have a relationship with a person at the car dealership that's been built over 15 years. It doesn't feel that way. And it's always kind of interesting. We usually lead off our class with a win-lose distributive exercise. I've always gotten, and I'm sure Beth does too, a student that takes full advantage of somebody else and maybe lies to them in the context of a win-lose negotiation. Then when we do the debriefs, they gloat about their outcome. And the trouble is that student's going to have a hard time finding a partner the rest of the semester. So we talk a lot about reputation and ethics in terms of the context of negotiations. And the best point, I think, if we try to convince students that, cooperative negotiators can be effective, even people that are conflict adverse can find their voice in negotiation. That gives them the confidence to really evolve their skills in the course. Now, in terms of areas of emphasis, Nolan, a lot of these have been hit on, but, managing emotions and dealing with difficult negotiators. And a lot of this gets back to role reversal about, why are they upset? Why are they being difficult? Is it the best point, a strategy? Is it situational? What I need to know about their relationship, if they're a principal, for example, agent relationship, that would explain to me or help me understand why things are difficult. The emotion piece is, I think we kind of diminish or dismiss our emotions, right? How that drives our behavior. Maybe I'm mad because of what happened in the last go-round, or I was disrespected. One of the negotiations I did, I came in and the unions had these large chairs and I was sitting in these almost like elementary school chairs. It was kind of a game, right, about power imbalance, physical power imbalance. And that just got me worked up. And then that whole negotiation was a disaster because I was so mad about it. Then sitting back, I'm like, that is probably, I overreacted. That was one of my hot buttons. And a lot of our students, going back to difficult negotiators, are going to negotiate with people that have far more experience than them or are older than they are. And so we talk a lot about role reversal. And, I tell students, like, everybody wants to give advice. Now, frequently, I'm the oldest person in the room, usually always the oldest person in most rooms I'm in anymore. But I say, what do old people like me? Well, we like our advice to be asked for. We like to pontificate. We like to share advice. So if you frame a conversation, not a win-lose, but like, okay, if you're in my situation, what might you do, given your experience? Then that tends to build that connection, that rapport we've been talking about this morning.
Emotions are such interesting things, right? Because they're kind of jagged. Feelings, a little sharp. How do I deal with them? And the tendency is, it feels like, is to diminish. Like what I want to do is just lower the temperature in the room. And sometimes emotions are really indicative of, well, there's an interest that isn't being met. There's a perception of maybe unfairness. Maybe it's a real actuality. And you mentioned, Beth, emotions earlier too. Any additional thoughts to what Lon just shared that you would kind of add from your own perspective about how to manage emotions well in the negotiation room?
Yeah, to your point, I teach that negotiations, when somebody's emotions are running high, it is a signal to some underlying interest, because we wouldn't be emotional, whether positive or negative, if it wasn't something that was of value to us or a very important issue. And I try to encourage students not to be fearful or to shy away from emotional negotiations, but to see it as an invitation to really now uncover what is so important. And going back to the active listening and just being heard. Yeah.
I'm curious, what you both see as, major changes, significant changes coming for the field of negotiation and conflict resolution in the near future. And do the changes that you anticipate on the horizon impact or create any challenges, both for practicing negotiation, but also for how you might teach the subject? And Lon, we can start with you if you want.
We've had the occasion to teach students that have been impacted directly by the pandemic. And so our graduating seniors this spring were the high school seniors that a lot of them didn't have that last year of high school in person. And I find the students that I had, at least in this past year, had a real challenge with face-to-face negotiations. So I think as we continue to have hybrid work and remote work, we're always going to have those remote negotiations, but they're going to be in person, whether it's face-to-face or through some kind of video conferencing platform, Zoom, Teams, etc. But a lot of our students don't have the experience or the confidence with those, even as we're doing today, the kind of the in-person conversation we have. So for example, I just talked to a student last week who's frustrated about not getting any job offers. He's a senior, graduated. But I asked, well, how are you going about looking for work? Well, he's just, emailing random general email addresses at companies. I said, well, who's the hiring manager? Who's the human resources director? I've had students this past year in particular who were fearful of going to the career fair. We have on-campus career fairs because they don't like that face-to-face interaction. So I think those of us who teach negotiations, one, we have to kind of do more focusing on the preparation for negotiations, getting some of the questions that Beth talked about, but also, how do you build rapport with students that are used to, sitting on a computer and being more anonymous? So this past year, for example, I did several things. I had them spend more time in preparing to negotiate, thinking about their game plan. Many of the exercises I used, I said, I don't want any offers for 15 minutes. I want you to build a connection for 15 minutes. And we did a lot more role plays than I had in the past. And then last thing, a lot of them hated this. I'd call them up, come to the front of the class and negotiate with me. I might have a watch I'm wearing, or I brought a coffee mug, and I say, let's negotiate this. And they hated it, right? They're in front of their students and their peers, but it gave them more confidence in a situation they haven't had a lot of experience with. And I think we're going to have to do that because, we've got a generation impacted by the pandemic, and a lot of work these days is done remotely. We've got to think about, how do you build rapport in a context other than just the traditional face-to-face context?
Nice. Beth, any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about the growing prevalence of AI in our lives and in the workplace. And I think there's some opportunities here to use AI to augment our negotiations, to help serve as coaches, and even negotiators. There's some growing research now on companies using AI to negotiate some low stakes contracts and things like that. And while I think that the use of AI can be a useful support and an additional tool for additional ideas or additional practice, my concern would be an over-reliance on AI to negotiate for us that could diminish these core communication skills we've been talking about, like articulating our interests, communication, active listening, and that experience Lon's talking about in the face-to-face interactions and negotiations, which will still constitute a majority of our day-to-day activities. But if we're not getting the practice because we're over-relying on AI, I definitely see it as a tool that can augment and enhance our negotiating ability if used wisely.
So let's just stay on this for 1 second and we'll see where this goes. Because with the challenge to face and level of, or maybe the lack of comfortability doing that, Lon, you offered some approaches that we can kind of take, 15 minutes before you even start discussing substance, just focus on rapport building, negotiating up the front of the class of the room. How do we, Beth, with what you were just saying, and Lon, jump in too, please. How do we get students used to using AI because it's going to be part of their world without becoming over reliant? How do we create a classroom environment where we can integrate it and still kind of address this cautionary concern about over-reliance, and now we're no longer critically thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm just at the beginning of the on-ramp on this. I'm currently teaching in a summer session and will, for the first time, have my students negotiate with AI to get some kinds of immediate feedback. So they're going to start to get some practice there with that. And I guess what I would say off the top of my head, zooming out, would be maybe let them use AI in their planning and preparation phase for some additional ideas or angles they hadn't considered. And then we do require them in some instances to negotiate face-to-face. So use this as the augmenting tool for additional feedback coaching in the planning phase.
Like that.
And it could also even give feedback. We do this as well, on the outcomes. That would be my response.
Like that. Lon, anything else?
No, I'd say the emphasis would be on the planning piece of it too, Aram. So, how do we articulate our offer? How might I better justify an offer? Create checklists to make sure I haven't missed something.
Right.
And putting that first offer together.
Yeah, I think for me, it's been helpful just to articulate any options that I'm generating and just make it more clear. Because it may make sense to me, but I don't know if it's going to be well received by the other person. And so just, hey, clean this up, please, AI, and presenting what I was going to say, and then them kicking out the response of just, oh, that's much more concise, much more clear, especially when it is not face-to-face and you do have to communicate via something else. I found that that's been the most effective. And then what I'd also say, maybe an approach is I'm still seeing the best results when groups of people get together, and whether it's just someone else that's not related to that topic, and just be able to ask some questions and help generate some further thought. I don't think AI has been able to get to that level of detail, and I don't think it's going to anytime soon with that regard. So maybe be able to put it back in groups may be helpful. So as we wrap up, what is one piece of advice you would give to someone just starting out in their career and looking to become a more effective negotiator? And Beth, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, my advice would be practice. Negotiation, I believe, is a skill like any other skill that you've achieved, competence at, that we learn with practice. And I like to use a swimming analogy. A person could read every book on the topic of swimming, but until they get in the pool, we don't know if they're going to be able to swim or not. And that's kind of the angle, the approach I take to teaching negotiation is students could read everything ever written on the subject, but until they're doing it, trying it, failing, not specifying the time frame, whatever the thing is, and gaining that practice, that's really how they're going to get better. I would suggest, have fun with it, start small. I share this quote with my students at the end of the semester by Chester Carras. In business, as in life, you don't get what you deserve, but you get what you negotiate. And so just to really encourage people to be out there doing it, trying it, both for themselves, their families, their organizations, and businesses.
Beth, that was a great response. When you have them practice and fail, do you do any sort of reflection? Is there a reflection piece built in? Can you just talk about that maybe as a learning point?
Yes, actually, probably the two biggest learning opportunities in the way I teach the course are the reflections. They do written reflections. I've had to cut back to lessen the number of assignments, but on most negotiations, they are doing a written reflection, and then the debrief, I find really is a rich learning opportunity. So we compare results and we ask everybody in the room, how and why did you end up with this result? Not to make anybody feel bad, but to understand everybody started with the same information, and yet we see these range of outcomes. Yeah. And that's the interesting part that I want to get them to start to think about and be curious about, learn from each other.
Yeah, thank you. Lon?
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that, Aram, about the use of technology. Beth and I both teach negotiations online, and I think people years past said you could never do this online. But the real value to me is we can record in breakout sessions, negotiations. In years past, you'd walk around the classroom and get bits and pieces of a negotiation, but it's kind of great to have a reflection assembly like Beth's talking about where, Nolan and Aram have to go back and watch their performance. And then I watch their performance, give them a little bit of coaching advice. So I think that's a really effective way to kind of build that skill set. But in terms of, what would tell somebody that you've got to be yourself, and that sounds really trite, but in the first chapter, we talk about the skills and traits of effective negotiators. Finding your own negotiation voice is part of it, being genuine. And I use an example in my own case where, I was trained by somebody who was everything I'm not: charismatic, bombastic, competitive. And then I started trying to copy that style. And unfortunately for me, I negotiated with some of the parties that knew him. And so they called me out, made me embarrassed. But it was a good takeaway. I can't be him, but I can be me.
Yeah.
And eventually I found my voice as more of a collaborative negotiator. But again, I would just say you can be an effective negotiator regardless of your personality type. It takes the practice, it takes the training, but a commitment to finding what is comfortable for you.
Now, the piece about recording, it's always amazing to me, and students will say this all the time. They're like, I didn't know I was saying that until I watched the recording of myself. So you both, Beth, you record your students as well and do some of the same things Lon was just talking about?
Yes, absolutely. We have a shared approach there. And like Lon said, I'll have them watch the recording and reflect on, answer some questions I've got. What did you notice? And then they're doing that over time. So what did you notice now at week 5, that you've improved upon or is different? And it might be simple things like I never once looked at the camera to I had a lot of filler words. I wasn't so prepared. So it ranges from negotiation as a topic to what are they doing on camera. But again, they're going to be operating in this virtual world, many of them, going forward.
Well, listen, thank you both so much for being with us. This has been a real joy. Lon, going back to what you kind of wrapped up with, which was, we need to be ourselves. And I know that, I say the same thing. I don't think it's trite at all. I think it's appropriate that we have power when we show up in a way that is genuine to who we are and negotiate consistently and not treated as some sort of hat or artificial thing I'm doing, but we're show up in a genuine way. I think that helps us build that rapport and connection that you both have talked about.
We appreciate the opportunity to talk about our book. We're proud of that, but we enjoy teaching negotiations, and I hope that came across today.
Sure did.
Yeah, thank you both for the opportunity. Really fun to get to discuss the topic of negotiation and how do we encourage undergrads or other people just to be more effective at this.
Well, that is it for us on today's podcast. If you haven't already, please rate, review, and subscribe to the NEGOTIATEx podcast, and we'll see you in the next episode. Hey, thanks for checking out this video on NEGOTIATEx TV. If you found any value at all, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification icon if you want to be notified of future videos. And then we also have a couple videos over here that you might be interested in checking out. If you in your small business, your team are looking to get negotiations or leadership training, then you can head over to negotiatex.com and learn more about the coaching services we offer. Thanks, and I'll see you over in the next video.